Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Today is a special day for the LinkedIn Live series that we have. I have the great honor to be talking with Anna Ott from HV Capital about the value of investing in ESG. This topic has been drawing quite a lot of discussion in the last few weeks, and I think we'll take the time today to explain what we see as value in this framework and maybe where we still would like to see a bit more work being done. For those of you that are joining in for the first time, the LinkedIn Live series has kicked off now. It's more than 6 months ago, and on a monthly basis, I have the chance to speak to incredibly smart, well informed people about different sides of the sustainability agenda, all pushing towards the same, which is how do you make businesses more sustainable? How do we achieve net zero and really ultimately align towards the same goal that is making our economy more resilient and more prepared for the future? So, without further ado, I would love to invite Anna on stage. Hi.
Hello. Good afternoon.
So happy to see you. How are you today?
It's amazing. It's Friday afternoon. I get to talk to you on LinkedIn Live about ESG, my favorite topic. So amazing.
I love seeing, as I was preparing for the event, I was actually on your LinkedIn and I noticed that you even have added to your title, which is, I think, something maybe new, or maybe I missed it along the way, also doubling as the ESG officer. Can you explain what this really means? Because at the end of the day, the title that you have is still VP People and ESG,
Yeah.
but what is an ESG officer and why doubling is one?
If only I knew, Lubo. No, I think I know. I've been doing this for almost 2 years. And yet at some point I thought, because I explained this over and over again, people met me at HV for being in charge of supporting amazing startup like yours on anything HR and talent, right? And then 2 years ago, we looked into ESG further, and I was asked if I want to lead this initiative too, which is kind of a project. I'm probably getting into this why we think this is a project where there's a start and probably not an end, but there's like a sequence to this. And I don't know. At some point, I thought, okay, I might as well give it a title so people know that they can talk to ESG to me about ESG and geek out with me about this topic. Other investors, startups, because this is part of my job. So part of my job is not only talking HR topics to startups in our portfolio, but also ESG. And also with a lot of industry experts and understanding how we can all get better on this collective learning journey that ESG is. But yeah, and there's a middle ground when you think about the E, S, and G. Social in the middle is a kind of a diversity related topic. So this is where there's a segue into HR already that kind of makes a bit more sense. Maybe not.
Yeah. The more time I've been spending in this industry, especially since 1 year ago, we decided with Planet to develop particular functionality on the product that was dedicated to automating reporting for ESG. The more it has become so clear that these topics are so intertwined, you can't depict E from the S, from the G. But I think just with the benefit of the doubt in our minds, I think it's so important to explain what is ESG? And maybe, as we spoke with you earlier, like we can actually make this more of a conversation rather than an
Yes.
interview for you. But what is for you ESG?
Yeah, and because I have so many questions, and so probably has the audience, and I'd love to geek out more about this because it's a new uncharted territory. But the way that I personally, or in my role at the fund, look at it is an initiative to create transparency. First and foremost, it's about an exercise to figure out how our operations, how we internally practice work on the axes of environment, social, and governance. So us as a firm, but also in our role as an investor in specifically predominantly tech startups at early and later stages, and how we think about the responsibility we have when it comes to doing what we have done for 20 plus years, but considering now environmental and social and governance aspects more so, and in a standardized framework. So there's definitions about the environmental aspect. There will be more definitions about what social will be looking like and governance, and there's KPI and metrics and more standards on how good looks like and how we think a good behavior and compliance looks like. Some of which is still in the making, but it's a way to navigate our business model on a more, I'd say, more responsible manner. keeping houses clean so that the people, the institutions, any sources of money that we have to invest knows how we're going to take care of this money, how we manage the wealth and return the deliveries, the funds to who we to our stakeholders, basically.
Yeah, I think here is important to mention, and I think for full disclosure, of course, I will mention that we get to work together. You work in HV Capital, which is one of the investors of Plan A, but also is one of the most experienced early stage funds. I actually learned quite a few interesting facts that the team gathered in preparation for the event, that HV has the most amount of unicorns for in EMEA in the portfolio, and also like over 1 billion under management, more than 200 startups that have been backed, and of course, like a current portfolio of 70 companies. I think why this is an important piece of information in the context of what you just said is because clearly you're saying there's a lot of assessment elements that maybe if you simply assess money missing as part of the performance analysis of a company. So ESG is a framework that gives this transparency. How I always explain it to our clients is that our economy has been looking into KPIs like growth, margin, and others as the key levers of success. But because externalities and all these like positive but also negative impacts that we all have with all the activities that we obviously push for, makes it a bit more difficult for these companies to really be assessed if things are working well or if they're not. If it doesn't account for the environmental, the social, and the governance elements. Why it really is important to take these into account. How did you come to the point of deciding that this was something you wanted to see being considered by the whole portfolio? What really was an event that pushed you into thinking about this?
I'm not sure if it was a specific event that ignited this journey, but I think we figured that, and this was before I even joined it, so this goes back like more than 2 years, when the general partners in our firm talked a lot more with the limited partners, i.e. the institutions, offering us their wealth to be returned on a higher level. So these would be pension funds, institutions of all sorts, in some ways also taxpayers' money. And I think that in this discussion between LPs and GPs, or generally VCs and their stakeholders, has been a constant evolution of this dialogue. So how do we think about ESG? Why does it matter? For whom does it matter more? But it's not something that a lot of VCs picked up a couple of years ago. I think that this only will be starting now. So this is a momentum that has been created with the flow of money, where funds like us will start position themselves on whether we think ESG matters to us and how specifically we want to take care of ESG. I'm happy to share more about how this looks like, but also with other funds too, and how that we can make this an industry movement where VCs take the responsibility that they have with the money that they invest in the startups they choose, how they support their startups so that they also go on this ESG journey. I think this has started a couple of years ago when this whole SFDR, the regulation started. And it's materializing only as we speak. So really next year will be a momentum for, I think, ESG in also our industry in the years to come, where now we've tried to figure out what we want to do, but next year you will start seeing results. And this will be even more interesting to see if this is something that will be there to last, which we all hope.
Yeah. From what you're saying, I'm understanding that HV, as much as there was a voluntary wish for this kind of a framework to become part of the way you assess the companies you invest in and the companies you nurture in their growth, like you do with Plan A, there was also a clear push from external stakeholders, like the investors in your fund. Is this correct to say? And what do you think is pushing these people and organizations to ask these questions? Are they seeing some risks for themselves?
I mean, just generally, it's not really mandatory. So it's a bit mandatory. So it's something that people think about, like as in, optionally, I could move into ESG. It's a requirement as it is, but there's ways to embrace it further or not. So for example, a fund like us could say, we are not at all looking at any environmental or social governance aspects when we do our investments, and we don't look at this when we run our operations, but there is ways that you can opt into it. And you can think about this, how can it affect my business and how can we do this better? Because it will also ultimately create more sustainable, more resilient firms. So it's a bit of there's a business case if you want to look at it, or you can call it an ESG premium. If you do the work today, if you start on this journey as a founder in a startup and think about your footprint, your responsibility towards your employees and such, there's a way that you could build more long-lasting companies, more resilient companies to climate change and a lot of other aspects that we can't even foresee, and be a bit more risk prone. And I think the same translates into our industry and also the institutions that we work with. So I think it just makes a lot of sense to also factor this in when you plan and start and grow your business, or when you act as an investor. But I understand also that there are investors who don't want to consider this at this point. But I feel I'm living in a bubble because I geek out more with people who are on the ESG bandwagon and less so with people who think that this is totally BS. So I think a lot of people are thinking this is an opportunity to also show profile, to show what matters to you, to think about principles of how you want to run your firm, how you want to attract talent, how you want to retain talent. There's a lot of things that come with it when you start this learning journey and this process of reframing a lot of processes within your firm.
Yeah, it's really important you mention all these different stakeholders that are pushing for this transformation to happen, because what we see also on a company level in our sphere where we work with corporates, they're incredibly pressured, especially into the B2C, so business to consumer segment, such as fashion, food, and other kind of this kinds of type of business products, in responding to the needs of their customers. So a customer would go into the shop and be, where was this produced? Well, show me maybe not what is the carbon footprint, but show me, have you treated your people fairly down the line? And from another stakeholder perspective, there's of course the investors. You said it, there's risks for them. There's money to be lost, credibility, reputation. And then on the B2B side is just this ongoing kind of, I would say, concern that all of these stakeholders simultaneously are pressuring, including the employees that are, I would say, the loudest voice on a more activist level. Do you feel like, just being cynical here, given we work in an industry that also can be considered not as important, especially I've heard over the last few weeks, like, oh, now sustainability with the economic situation is going to become secondary and so on. Let's wait and see, but I have a bit of a different opinion. Do you feel like investors are embracing this topic, or is it still a niche? You mentioned you live in a bubble. I think I do too, but how do you feel about the whole sphere of sustainability?
So my bubble is called the Venture ESG Initiative, which is a great initiative for everyone who's in private equity and venture capital. You should look it up, Venture ESG. And I've seen this network grow from a very small group of VCs who were like the early adopters, if you think about it, like us, to an amazing global network. So it would be fair to assess that a lot of venture capital firms think about this, explore this. And why some of them, because some of the VCs are small by resources and headcount, we have the luxury to be a vast team. People like me can spend a lot of time on this topic, and I acknowledge that other funds can't. But I think a lot of funds have started to realize that this is an opportunity. As I said, it creates a purpose, it creates a direction, it creates meaning, it creates better processes and governance, it creates a great opportunity to work on the investments that they do on a more sustainable and resilient way. There's a lot of things that obviously I'm advocating for it, and obviously I wouldn't be against it, but I think that it just makes sense when you look at it and the times we live in, the zeitgeist we have, that this is something worth exploring. And some move slower than others, and some are probably ahead of us. A lot of funds probably will be ahead of us with this because it requires resources, it requires a lot of people. I'm not doing ESG by myself, so I'm the ESG sir, but there's a lot of people in our firm too that are involved in this, in finance and legal and investment, because it's a bit of an effort. But I think it's worth exploring because it can create, I think it can create impact in the sense that you think about how we want to manage portfolio companies, how we want to select founders, how we want to help them grow their businesses in a different manner than before.
Yeah. You recently released, I would say quite kindly to the whole community, openly, your process of thinking about the ESG policy framework within HV. I think you've been involved in a lot of pan-industry initiatives like the ones you just mentioned, but it will be interesting just to hear from your perspective, what are the KPIs that are within these three buckets that are E, S, and G that you consider when you are investing or supporting existing portfolio?
So as a disclaimer, when we invest in an early stage company, there's little, if no data. So we can't look at metrics really. We can look at the sentiment, how ESG is related to the business model sometimes, because doing a sustainable company or product or service is not at all ESG. It might be intertwined where a company like yours, who is working on carbon accounting, for sure has worked on ESG internally too. So sometimes this is the same thing, but it's not necessarily intertwined. But when we look at early stage startups, we look at how they think about this. Is this something that they have explored? Is this something that they start to work on? Are they open towards it? Because I feel that the earlier startups start working on this, the earlier they start tracking data, the more they can show progress also to future investors, not us, but everyone else. And I think this will be increasingly important when you do fundraise as a tech and startup, that you show you have done your ESG homework and that you have the data. Like unadjusted gender pay gap, for example, is one of the metrics that we track. So it's not so much what we check in when we consider an investment, but it's something that we start monitoring as soon as we are an investor. In growth stage investment, it's different because most of the companies arrive at a large organizational size with more data and more reporting and more metrics to track. And one of the things that I guess is also a big hurdle, I'd love to hear your take on this, a lot of startups still struggle with figuring out where to start when, for example, they need to start measuring their carbon footprints. How to think about the different scopes. What about companies that are fully remote? What about companies that have a tangible product with a supply chain? So there's a lot of new things for founders to explore when they want to work on E. The S part, so much is not as, I mean, speaking as an HR person, I know that it's easier to track, for example, gender pay gap, how your wages compare to the market, how diverse your firm is, how you have rolled out in governance diversity policies, for example. There's a lot of things that is a core of the HR work that you can build on. E, for most companies, I feel, is a bit of a trickier thing, but I mean, I would love to hear how you think about this, because you in your firm, you speak more to startups than I do about that uptake.
Yeah, really important point you're making in terms of the E bit within an early stage company where data is missing. What we always say, and actually this is the response we give even to corporates that are in the beginning of their journey and have no steps behind them on the topic, is it is a process. It's not going to be an overnight success, and you need to start with the data that is available to you. We, with our software, are able to fill in the gaps that are missing. And essentially, there's a crash course into sustainability with the customer success team, where you, while filling the gaps, then can increase accuracy by us figuring out like the third parties that need to help you with gathering this data, be it your suppliers, your employees, your investments, if it's a financial institution. But ultimately, you start with what you have, use where the gaps are, data that can allow you to see what are the benchmarks. But then you start immediately implementing the small yet impactful agendas and small points that would allow for the first decarbonization activities to happen, because there's a lot of obvious steps that a business can take that if there's no sustainability agenda, I can bet they've not been taken. What we see quite a lot in many early stage companies is that there's someone called a green champion. That's this person that really pushes it all and has a level of enthusiasm that allows them to try to figure out where the data is sitting, go and chase third parties, like, for example, their office provider or facility provider, to figure out like what is our energy company. Then they go and find out like what are the policies within the company related to E and also S and also G. And they are the force behind it in the beginning for super small micro entities. But then as they get the fast results, normally this trickles down into the whole organization. A fantastic example of that is N26, where we kicked off with one person. She built a green team around her, and ultimately was able not only to adopt the planning software, but now they have full-time people working on ESG. And that was by being able to demonstrate the value of kicking off the initiative, starting to see the engagement within the company, and then scaling it up to a level where it becomes an actual function within the business.
And this is a perfect journey that you just described, because this is also what we see. And as I said, I've been talking to startups for like 2 years about this topic. And there's some who say, I want to get started, but I don't know how. It's really hard to get the data, but it's good to hear that there's more benchmarks available to them also, because if you have benchmarks, you kind of can work around this and get started still. To see where you're going. For example, with unadjusted gender pay gap, I think for the first year, it was really hard for startups to figure out what is a good or bad unadjusted gender pay gap. And for everyone who doesn't know, it's the median average pay of a woman converts to a man in a company and the difference between it. So most companies and most tech startups in Europe, I think, have a 20% gender pay gap in favor of men. So men make 20% more money than women in the same organization, not same role, but overall in the same organization. But is 20% good? I mean, obviously 20% is not great, and I hate 20%, and I want to see this diminish, but is 20% less? It's probably something, what is a reasonable, achievable goal? Is it 15%? And I think generally, to step back, when we talk about ESG, we think that we now start creating more transparency, which is what everyone needs and wants, because then it will unlock us to manage with the data. A lot of ways how we can get better. So what would be the North Star, for example, for unadjusted gender pay gap, one for carbon footprint? How can we unlink carbon footprint from growth of a company in revenue, like carbon intensity, for example? Can we figure out how this is doable? And this is something that the whole industry will be starting to learn as the years to come, which is an exciting momentum. But we're, at this point, still having a hard time getting more data.
Yeah. So we covered E. There we have emissions, policy associated to reporting on these emissions. You have behaviors within the company in terms of like policies that are environmentally friendly or not so environmentally friendly, and the assessment of that. On the social side, you mentioned pay, you mentioned equality. Can you add a bit more light on the governance side? Because I think this is where there's still a little bit of an ambiguity. I continuously hear from people saying, yeah, it's all about like the E and all these legislations. They're all about the environmental stuff. And then everything else is really superficial. I don't agree with that, because I think we're seeing, especially with private equities that we work with, there's like 500 questions that you need to respond to. I'm sure that it's not easy to have to go through this as a portfolio company, but there is depth to the questions that can be asked. And I would wonder, like, A, what do you think about the governance side? What are the important metrics for you that you've embedded in your own assessment? And then maybe going into how can a company that is super small think of these topics overnight? Like, and probably it feels a bit overwhelming. That would be my assumption.
No, for sure, it feels overwhelming also for different reasons, because everyone is sending them different questionnaires and they're like flabbergasted. Like, what is this? Well, how can I answer this? There's like a gazillion ways you can ask the same questions, right? For governance baseline, I mean, there's also a standard list of KPIs that one should track when it comes to like the regulatory part. It's called principal adverse indicators, PAIs. So there's a lot of information available if one starts Googling on this. But the way that I think about governance and explain it to founders is, do you have specific policies in place to think about how you decide on stuff, how you involve board members, how your board looks like? The representation when it comes to gender, for example, is one of the only data we can track when it comes to diversity in Germany. But how's your gender makeup of your firm? How decisions done, and what kind of policies do you have in place? For example, incident reporting, whistleblowing, code of conduct, ethics, so all those things. And I mean, I acknowledge that policies sound really, really boring, specifically you're overexcited, recently funded VC funded startup, and you don't want to be thinking about bureaucracy and policy and whatnot. But it can surely help to probably think about principles that might be core to your business and also to the culture you create. So front-loading this to the early days of a company is also making sense, not only from an ESG perspective, because you can create clarity around how we think about the ethical guidelines. For example, when we have customer service facing businesses, how do we deal with like customers overstepping a line, right? What does misconduct look like? What is a whistleblowing system? How do we protect our employees, for example, is one of the things that we can work on. And I think it makes sense to think about those things also. What kind of employer do you want to be? What kind of workplace do you want to create?
I want to use this moment to actually say a massive thank you to you, because my whole company, my whole team, actually, a lot of the people that manage business, but also other topics, always like amazed to be able to spend time with you, because you're just not only this energy ball of excitement, positivity, but you're so knowledgeable and you do it with so much love for people. And I think that was one of the things I remember, and that's an anecdote that has not been shared, but I remember when we were still in the due diligence process with HV, you were one of the last people that I spoke to, and I was like, if I'm working with this lady after having met like Alex, I was like, okay, that's perfect. This is, I'm signing up for that. But why I'm saying this is because, first of all, to say thank you, but then also I want to double down on that, because honestly, you have no idea how much cynicism I deal with on daily basis, and I think everyone that works in the business of good in one way or another have to think about this. And there's like, but this whole thing, like, why are we even doing it? And you said something really powerful. You were, if you want your employees to be loyal, if you want like to be able to attract talent, to protect your employees, you need to have these values in place. Why does this matter? Like, what if there's like a naysayer that is listening to us now? And please write your questions in the chat if you want to criticize or comment. How could you respond to them that values matter in this whole business of building tech startups?
First of all, thank you for the flattering intro and segue into this. I'm not really good with compliments, but I'm getting them. But I love your team too. You hired some amazing people. I hope a lot of more people will meet more of your team because they're brilliant. On the topic of culture, because I understand why core values and culture is a bit of a fluffy thing, and a lot of founders go into this adventure to just execute, grow, prove their point, find product market fit, and all those things, and just monitor a lot of metrics. And I think that there are some archetypical founders who are like totally obsessed with those kinds of things. And we have met some of them, and we know them, right? And they have their fair share of the market. At the same time, we see the talent markets had shifted to being more demanding. There's a new generation in the workforce. They want to have a purpose, they want to have an impact, they have questions, and they have no problem with asking those questions and deciding differently and doing a different diligence on the jobs they choose, the companies they associate themselves with, the career that they have. So it's probably good to be prepared for those kind of questions, and you should have answers, because there will be people with questions about how you practice your company, how you work towards inclusion and belonging. And conversely, at the same time, however you unknowingly or knowingly and deliberately work on your culture, you will create a culture either way. If I'm intentionally working on the culture, I can have a control of how I can shape the culture by the people I hire, by creating more people that create a bit of a culture add to my firm and broaden the diversity of my team and all those things. Or I can not do this intentionally, but I will still have a culture. I will still share it and signal values that are rewarded, that are probably not rewarded, but like called out for, and all those things. There's signals sent in any case. So I think when you think about it that way, you should be probably taking action to steer it in a manner that you feel is the one company that you create. Most founders don't create a gazillion companies. Most founders in their lifetime create one or two companies. So you want to make this a great company, something that you can take pride in and people work in with their best performance and motivation.
I'm fully behind you on this, and I think it has been becoming so evident in the way hiring has happened. I now anecdotally have been in so many circumstances where people explain to us how they chose plan A over a salary that maybe was like corporate when you've worked there for 10 years, because they found for themselves a purpose and they found their values being aligned. And especially, I think, in these times where there's so much uncertainty on so many levels, like we just went through COVID, now there's like a lot of panic about the levels of inflation. You have this energy crisis upon us, and there's just continuous instability in one way or another, which unfortunately, due to climate change, is not made, feel like it's something that will fade away. It's more like the new normal, where there's continuously need for adaptability and being flexible and learning about new circumstances. The only thing you know for certain is that you dedicate your time and you assign yourself to something that can continuously deliver this positivity that maybe you don't get from the outside world and all the time. So that's at least like what I've observed. I don't know if you feel like this based on also the culture you build in HV.
And circling back to your green team and the green champions, I think this is one of the things where we see this is live in action, right? So when we talk to startups, sometimes they're not really aware of how they can play in ESG, not within their operations. So like, where's my lever? Like, what do I pull? How do I look at it? If I'm, for example, like a software only business, a SaaS company with like 40 remote employees, where do I start? There is no ESG in my business, but there is. And finally, one of the green champions at Zender, Graham, he placed a bet once. He said he will bet €1,000 that every company in our portfolio can have an ESG play in their business, which I'm still eager to see, but I'm quite sure he's right. And I think that if you start exploring ESG and how you can do better and be more responsible, you will also explore ways that can involve people to shape your firm. And specifically, and this is interlinked to what you just said about young people and the purpose and the planet that they want to save and the ways that they think about climate action, it just feeds in really well because you give them a way to control how the companies that they give their time and dedicate their resources to can be responsible. So a lot of times we have seen in startups that they come with amazing initiatives, like things that oftentimes are overlooked. But when you activate everyone in your firm to have what I call the ESG lens or mindset, they walk around the office like literally, and they will say, "Oh, we don't have a unisex toilet, as in we should have a unisex toilet." And then there's, "Oh, we should only have vegan food at the catering, or we should have local food," and all those things. It's a way that you can activate people to feel that they're also in control. And to be a bit more philosophical, because it's Friday afternoon, a lot of people feel that they're out of control and have been for the last 2 years. We were locked in, we couldn't decide whom to meet and when and where to go and all those things. And now it's a way to give back control to things that might be important to us. Surely not for everyone. And I think surely also these times call for people who have existential anxiety and needs. And we should acknowledge and respect this too. But there's a lot of people in the workforce today who want to have a mission that they can subscribe to. And ESG can be a segue into finding your mission if you don't have it as a purpose of your company, like Plan A, but you can find a meaning.
Yeah, I am, of course, like fully aligned, and I think it's really inspirational what you said. One observation also that I think just adds upon my belief in all the words that you just shared now is that the more a company grows, also the less you have ownership of the way the culture shapes. And by having a framework that you have embedded in people's minds as part of the onboarding, as part of the way decisions are being made, like for example, in Plan A, we don't buy meat with the money that our investors have given us, because it's not that we judge anyone that eats meat, but it's more like, because people do that in the office, of course, like anyone is free to do whatever they want, but it's more like we want to stand for the things that we also sell to the world, which is like there's a problem with climate change, like we also need to align to that. We don't use plastic as part of like the packaging for the things that we have in the office, like these small things that might seem minuscule, but it's more you give a signal to anyone that is new, that is joining the company, to those that are there for a longer time, and then that essentially sits on the way people think. And as the company grows, like you have very little ownership of how this culture is going to shape. By having this framework, you really allow for it to have a form that you at least align to, even though it would develop in one way or another and expand.
And I think it's also about surfacing things, right? Because there's some visible artifacts of culture. It's like the way that we design offices, the way that we ask people to come in and not come into the office. Those kind of things are very visible and even tangible sometimes. But below this, there's a lot of room to maneuver for other ESG implementations that you want to create. But you need to start somewhere. So start with the visible ones, the ones that everyone sees physically in the office. For example, there can be a whole good debates about visible representation of diversity in the office. There's a lot of offices that have stock photos of just men, or like the famous engineers and software developers of this world. I would name them, but we all know how these look like, right? And how we think about designing for a different experience. And then you can go further and deeper into how you design your organization for a lot of other more responsibility aspects, as said, environmental, social, and governance aspects. And this is, as said, and although ESG probably was never meant to look into how companies are run on this level and how it feeds into HR and cultural work, it surely has an impact. And I think it's the most positive impact. So far, we have seen this only transpire into a very positive way in the startups that we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, of course, have the honor to work with quite a few of them. And we've seen how important it has been for their next stage. Because actually, one clear observation, especially for pre-IPO companies, even though IPO at the moment is not a word that should be mentioned, is that there's literally been data that shows that companies would be devalued between like 3 to 5, sometimes 10% if they don't have a clearly outlined view on their environmental, social, and governance performance. I want to invite people because there's already quite a lot of questions in the chat, but still, like, put your
Good.
question. We have over 100 people watching live at this point, and there's a lot of insightful comments, a lot of people being tagged, also people praising you, Anna. So it's quite of a beautiful palette of opportunities for engagement. But please put your questions because we're gonna make sure we cover as many of them as possible. And I want to bring in the discussion the elephant in the room, and it's like, is ESG actually a thing? There's been so much drama lately. There's been so much comments, especially from San Francisco investors, saying it does not make sense. Famous entrepreneurs have said like they do not want to adhere to any of these standards. We even have a case where a state in the US divested from one of the biggest asset managers because they were assigning and aligning themselves to the ESG framework. This sounds like a lot of madness. And for those that are not like you and I in the industry on daily basis, it probably gives a little bit of a doubt if we should be spending time with ESG. I want to set the scene by saying that my view in anything in life is that there's no black and white, and we should always find a way to build up on what has existed before. But maybe there's another perspective. I would love to hear how you've been feeling about these discussions lately.
The same kind of. It's a whirlwind. So everyone was the sentiment initially was very positive, and then there's ways where we were probably a bit worn out by all the regulatory work that came in, and then like overloaded us with reading taxonomies and all those things and RTS and whatnot. And I think that at some point people were a bit exhausted. And then there was moments where you, as said, there was a media man, it just probably makes a good clickbait. Maybe it's just this. It just is good to be controversial on media because it gives you the clicks. It is something that is really interesting to debate. And oftentimes I'm not even sure if this is done by expert, not to be overstepping here, but I recently read an article where ESG wasn't even properly described, but it was very against it. And it's like, you don't even know the core definition of it. But anyhow, let's just like say that it's not here to stay, however polite or unpolitely you want to put this. And I think I can't speak for the whole of the industry, obviously. I can speak for us. I think for HV, this is here to stay. We have committed to ESG. We have committed to SFDR reporting on level 8, Article 8, because I saw that question here too. And this will be happening next year with the next fund. There's a lot of things that we have prepared and are looking forward to see them go into the market and work with the startups on and get into the action, because there was a long time of preparation now. And I can't wait to see this impact. And it might not be perfect. And one of the mantras I have, and my colleagues hate me for saying this over and over again, but it's progression over perfection. It doesn't have to be perfect when it starts. It just needs to take us into a direction that is really meaningful to the endurance of this planet, to the longevity of the world we want to navigate into, a lot of other things that are dear to me as an HR professional. So I personally wouldn't be putting this into the bucket of like hype and not reality. I think it's reality and will be becoming a standard, and it is for sure already a standard in some places. But yeah, there's trolls everywhere on every topic.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, one question that I had based on some, again, observations from the last few months has been, as the sustainability topic in particular evolves a lot more across industries, you're starting to see, of course, like the filtering of those that are pioneering the space, they're leading the way, they're really like being like really effective with their resources, pushing a lot of exciting agendas. Other that just want to tick off the box and then be aligned with the regulation. I think this is a longer debate. What is the approach? Like, is regulation the good first step? Should it be action? But my question to you, especially in terms of the portfolio that you're observing in terms of sustainability, is there a lot of push for actual action after the data has come in? Do companies want to move and change, or is it more, okay, now we've reported to Anna and we don't want to talk to her anymore, another 6 months until she doesn't ask for the next report.
People just generally don't want to be talking to me about it. No, they do. And I think that there's a lot of ways we can learn about this. So what we see as a sentiment, and it's rather a sentiment than actual fact, because it's still too anecdotal to be proven. I think one of the sentiments we see is that when you think about the core DNA of a founder, it's a bit of a pioneer in finding new ways to create business and growth. They're always hunting for growth. There's a growth FOMO in every founder, hopefully. And our portfolio, for sure, it is. And when you think about ESG, how you keep your clouds clean, how you think about environment, diversity, etc., what we have already alluded to, there are some founders who really think about, how we can make this something that is a growth opportunity for our business too. Because it doesn't necessarily start with creating a sustainability play in your business model, but it can surely lead to it sometimes. And we have seen that there's an uptake and a pioneer spirit with founders who say, oh, hold on, I can probably move into a space. I alluded to Zender earlier, Zender is a mobility platform. And they have figured out that obviously, when you think about advanced fuel, this creates an opportunity to them. And I never get tired of sharing this example because it's a good one to understand that they didn't start with ESG, but for sure, because they also do ESG, they also figured out that there's growth opportunity. They can outsmart the companies that they are facing, the industries they navigate and try to disrupt. And I think when you think about the entrepreneurial spirit that we are part of, there's a lot of companies who have not only started to revamp their business into spaces to figure out if they can grow there or there's business opportunity to harvest, but there's also companies like you who have started from this with a dedicated purpose from day one, where we think that technology can be part of fighting climate change and mitigating climate change and fighting the crisis that we live in and create solutions that will help us with the longevity of this planet. And I think this also speaks to the pioneer spirit of the startups, where obviously ESG is just a baseline tick box exercise for some, but for some it's getting a bit more into a business purpose and growth potential, which is amazing to see. And there's more companies in this space started every day as we speak, with founders who think, okay, I want to create an environmental or responsibility tech solution.
I remember the first time when I was speaking to Graham from Zender, and I was like, what is this company? Like, they've gotten so far that they literally have like a chief revenue officer, the chief green revenue officer. Now we see it in many client cases, and there's obviously a lot of, I would say, diversity in the approaches that businesses take towards like labeling this person that would be the shepherd of goodness. But I think it's pretty amazing what they've been able to do, because it's not an industry where you outright also are able to see this sustainability mindset being embedded. We're getting a lot of questions, and I think you'll be respectful to all of those people that have been sharing their questions to get them covered one after the other. So the first one that we have is from an anonymous user. Getting to a delicate topic, do you think the current situation slows down or accelerates ESG adoption?
I hope, and I don't know if that's a proof point, but I hope it will accelerate and not slow down. Because it's the one time where startups are growing less sometimes, right? Hiring volume generally, in our portfolio at least, is slowed down. So this is the time when you think about how we can rebuild our company and the architecture of our firm and the governance and procedures to be more sustainable, whichever crisis will come up next, because we have seen there's one crisis that we just passed through. There's another one coming up that we will for sure be third wave. So there will be more crisis, as you said, there will be more change. How can we create a sustainability? If your business has slowed down because of the market, this is the best time to start working on those things, because I understand when sometimes growth is the priority, ESG comes second. But maybe for some businesses, this is the opportunity to switch and do ESG first when there's no growth. And hopefully everyone is growing, but some slower than others.
I mean, let's be realistic. There's a lot of business models that have been put under pressure because of some concerns. But one thing I always keep on saying, especially to our clients that have been looking into expanding exactly with the logic that you shared, which is this is the perfect moment for us to take an action, has been like, we need to understand that sustainability and this kind of more sustainable growth thinking is not a trend. It's something that is a response to the economic instability that we've seen, because the economic model that we've been using never accounted for the externalities that are actually coming as costs at the moment, be it like due to instability in supply chains, also the way reputationally a company can be damaged if they're caught into greenwashing and so on, which again leads to loss in money. with this in mind, I think it's inevitable for anyone to start acting on that. And I think I'll join on the bet that was given earlier. I don't know, it was Graham or someone else. But I think it is definitely the best moment to act on that, and also place the time and effort to see how the transformation happens, not only setting up the formula for assessing your ESG performance, but also being a bit more open to the transformation piece, which inevitably also will come. Second question that we also can cover is that's definitely for you, something you look at on daily basis, like how do you incentivize new companies that join your portfolio to join the ESG efforts of the fund?
So there's two ways to think about this. The existing portfolio, which I sometimes refer to as the legacy portfolio, because it has been there as I arrived, and it has been there before we started working on ESG really as in full-fledged next year. So the way that we currently work with the existing portfolio is that we don't need to incentivize them, but we encourage them and we empower them and we share anecdotes and we create groups within ESG experts, as we call it, the green champions, the shepherds of goodness, as I would probably steal from you, because that's a perfect title for everyone to have on their LinkedIn profile. But connect them so that they also support each other, because I think from all we said at the same time, ESG is not a proprietary knowledge. We are here to share. We share everything we know. I personally share everything that I've found with everyone else who's interested, and so do the startups. And this creates a momentum where they think, I can be doing this, because it doesn't have to be such a burdensome exercise. It can be something that I can pick up from others. As founders have started building their companies anyways, you learn from other founders. You don't go into the books. I mean, you surely read your Ray Dalio and such, but I think the real insights come from talking to other founders and see what they do as a best practice. So this has kind of created a dynamic on its own, where we neither had to incentivize nor to shame them for not doing any work. It will shift with the new fund, probably, where this has been part of the DNA of this fund from day one. So when startups start reaching out to us now, and probably for the next fund too, they will know from before they even be part of the portfolio how we think about those things, and they can prescribe to it and be on this journey, hopefully with us. And I'm sure we will find ways to help them get motivated about this. So far, we didn't see any backlash, really. I think that a lot of people think that startups hate ESG. I don't think startups hate ESG.
I don't think they hate it. I definitely don't. But I think, especially when you're an inexperienced business builder, you often align yourself to KPIs that maybe the whole world talks about. And if all of a sudden you need to assess additional ones, you don't see the value if they're not coupled to your environment, to your monetary performance. And even though you really clearly explained how you're making money by being better at ESG, I can argue that not everyone still gets it.
I know, but then when you think about it, and most of the founders I've met are really, really smart and brilliant and well educated. I think that it's not too complicated to figure out what ESG can be in your business. So if I understood it, everyone else will be for sure understanding it too. And the second part of it is a way that you can ensure that you be successful in fundraising. I think that there will be some point an ESG premium if you go fundraising, and there will be probably different sources of money that you can use and harvest if you have done your ESG work, and if you can show progress on ESG data, as in carbon footprint Q1, carbon footprint Q2, unlock from growth, and diversity metrics go perfect, and all those things. And I think there's a way that you can build this into your data room and thereby have an easier time maybe in fundraising, or preempt all those questions that will come anyways. A lot of funds will start doing ESG due diligence on you, so you get prepared. It's going to be part of your standard items of things you're going to prepare when you fundraise.
I fully agree with you, and I think one learning as a founder that now has gone through multiple funding rounds, there's so much benefit to the support that a VC like HV, for example, gives, in the sense that I don't know how it is for others. So like, we're spoiled to be shepherded and well taken care of by you, Yanis, Alex, and many other people within the team that constantly think about what's an opportunity for us and from a business perspective. But what else there is on offer, and I can say about what you do, but then I think also other VCs, some in some one or another way do it, is you get a portfolio of suggestions on how to navigate your business better without you having to spend money or time on consultants that can shape your ESG policy, because you've already set the KPIs that people should assess. There's also like certain frameworks that can be used on a more businessy like level of how do you set partnerships and so on. And these things, if they're there, they should be used. For anyone that has a VC-backed company, you need to use them because they probably are in place because they put you in a better position to bring better returns to the fund. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, like there's a big logic of you even putting these efforts because you know they're going to make more money to the fund in terms of returning back to the investors.
Yeah, and totally copy paste the approaches from other funders if they're willing to share it. Still like an artist, it's what the best way to get everyone on the same standard in ESG, right? There shouldn't be like a specific unique angle to ESG for a startup. You totally build on what others have done and what your VC will help you do.
Yeah, we have a question about the SFDR requirements. I think you did mention some elements of the answer of this question, but do you want to comment on it also in the context of the new fund and also the articles that you decided to align yourself to?
Yeah, so we're going to be SFDR 8, which means that we're going to have a financial product that has environmental sustainability characteristics. This would also lead into a better reporting for the startups that join in the new fund, which we don't know when it will be starting, so somewhere next year. And obviously from the day that the startup joins the portfolio, we work on them, how they can collect data, what kind of data this will be in line with the reporting standards. We need to comply. But at the same time, we want to figure out how we can create probably more smart data around the standard items too. For example, we think a lot about female representation in executive panels. So we want to figure out where females are represented, what the progression path might look like. So there's a lot of ways we can explore this, because the targets we want to set for ourselves and what we want to achieve with this fund will be also obviously linked to SFDR. But baseline answer is 8, not 9, neither 6, and I don't even know 7 exists.
It definitely makes sense. And I'm racing through the questions because we only have 7 minutes. And I think like with you, I probably can extend this life in 5 hours. We move to wine and then continue the Friday evening to
I can also speak super fast. People want to see this in slow motion in the recording, maybe.
You've been able to cover like 3 hours worth of life with your speed of speaking. Both you and I, I'm sure that some people are pausers now to go through the content that has been shared. We have a question that is related to whether there's conflict between profitability and sustainability. I have opinions here, and I would love to give you, of course, like the opportunity to share what you see in the scene.
I mean, this is a super fair question, and I would love to give a straightforward answer, but I would say it's one of those depends things where sometimes short-term profitability will probably stand in the way of long-term sustainability and vice versa. I don't think that people should be obsessed with neither nor, because most of the time there will be a way that you can marry this. I'm hopeful, maybe a bit naively optimistic sometimes, that there is a ways to marry profitability and sustainability when we define sustainability as in be ESG compliant, do your work, be responsible. When we think about sustainability as in doing sustainable business products, like as in zero waste or carbon zero and all those things, net zero, there's a lot of other aspects to it where probably these can be controversial to a profitability play, but I think it depends on the business model that you're working on. As said, if you're a SaaS company and you want to sell software and you have a 40-ish people remote team, you can be very profitable, hopefully, and I'm quite sure in these times you can, and you can still have a responsible approach to your business, which would be in line with the ESG. I don't think that there should be a conflict. And if you want to increase your sustainability footprint, that might be a different approach anyway. So if you're a software like Plan A, that's a sustainability play, where this is totally married from the get-go. So I don't think, maybe it's semantics also, right? But I think profitability and ESG, not a conflict. Sustainability, profitability depends on your business model.
If I can sum it up from my perspective in one sentence, if your business is not prepared for the risks of the future, that is not a sustainable business. And the risks of the future are actually related to climate change. They're related to disturbances in supply chains coming out of climate change. Also, lack of access to certain resources. And we can go on about all these building blocks of our existence that are at the moment under threat because of the fact that we are not assessing extensive amount of KPIs that give us an overview of what a true cost is and what actually the future will hold for businesses if we don't only look at money. We have one question that probably will be the last before I give you the word. Oh, wow. I didn't mean to. That's so nice. Okay. That was not
But
meant to.
shout out to Noor. No, Noor was my former ESG intern. She's an amazing. Everyone needs to hire someone in ESG. She's incredible, brilliant, and insightful. Thank you, Noor, for hijacking this conversation. It's amazing.
I meant to have put this question as the final one, which is coming from, because at the moment the event is being streamed on my LinkedIn, on the Planet LinkedIn, on YouTube, and across a few other channels. So Carolina Burns is asking, do you observe the ESG momentum in the EU more than in the US?
Yes, 100%. I think it's different. I mean, technically, also semantics again, when you think about ESG, SFDR, and the whole shenanigans, there's a very European thing linked to the European Green Deal, totally very territorial in our geography. At the same time, there's a different version of it for sure in other territories. And then the US would be some really interesting market to explore, but it's a different conversation. I would pick just one way to differentiate this when you think about the S part. When we talk about social aspects here, we talk about gender representation and diversity. When you talk to, for example, I talk to investors in the US, they talk about race and racial inequality, something that is not happening in the same semantics here. It is surely happening here, but it's a different semantics. So there's different aspects of it. Hopefully they all try to figure out the same agenda, as in make this planet a more livable, long-lasting planet for everyone with more equal access to everything. Different packages, probably. Hopefully a bit more of the same inside.
My final question to you would be, what keeps you going? You have so much energy, so much positivity. And as you said, we need to be a bit more philosophical. It's a Friday afternoon, just 1 hour before maybe many people kick off some more chilled agenda. Where does this come from and what keeps you going, especially with the topics that you deal with that are not always the easiest?
I think, first and foremost, my source of energy is the love that I get and the feedback that I get to work with the startups. So it's utterly simple, but I'm triggered by people feeling that whatever I can share or whenever I can just listen sometimes is of value to them, because I understand that startups they're vibrant, they're hectic, they're stressful. The last 2 years were so draining on a lot of people, specifically HR, a lot of things that we had to work on that were new to us. And if there's someone like me who helps them just vent sometimes, just like think out loud, have a sounding board, pick up some best practices so they can progress in their work that they have to do, because it's a lot. And I can take off some of the mental load or the workload off them. Most of them are, I think everyone actually is very, very grateful. And this is, I mean, the love that you get is the love that you give. It's a very simple way that I'm built and I'm wired. And I think this is what keeps me going, that I see startups love talking more about ESG. They share what they know. I can share it with others, and I can create and give back to the ecosystem that we navigate in. And this makes me really proud. And most of the days that I see that everyone is trying to get better, but more healthier workplaces, more sustainable businesses. It's baseline as simple. And getting to talk to people like you on Friday afternoons. And next time we should have drinks, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. Anna, it's been an utmost pleasure, as per usual, to have the chance to spend 1 hour with you. It has passed so fast because we just had so many things to discuss, and we haven't even been able to cover all the questions that were there. But thank you so much. Enjoy the weekend, and thanks to everyone for listening. And
everyone, happy weekend.
Bye. I'm staying here for one additional second just to invite you to the next event that we're organizing, which is going to be focused on ensuring that a climate strategy actually turns into action. Why does this matter? There's been a lot of these pledges and announcements about where companies and how companies will be able to reduce by 2050 and 60 their emissions and environmental footprint, as well as improve their ESG performance. How does this really turn into reality? We'll discuss with Lena Engel, who's the head of sustainability of Joschka Fischer and partner. Join us on the 17th of November at 1 p.m. When we'll be discussing these topics. Until then, enjoy the weekend and see you soon.